In a world where weakness means death, a half-breed servant nobody sees is about to shatter every rule. When the most feared alpha king in the territory chooses her over the most powerful nobles in the realm. This is the story of how one invisible girl became the queen who changed everything. Stay until the end to see how she survives assassination attempts, proves every doubter wrong, and builds an empire from nothing. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from, and hit that like button if you believe the underestimated can rise. The whip cracked across the morning air, and Elena Voss didn't flinch. She'd learned not to. Flinching drew attention, and attention in the Ironclaw Fortress meant pain. Or worse, it meant being remembered. So she kept her head down, her movements small and efficient as she scrubbed the stone floor of the training yard's outer corridor, her knees aching against the cold flagstones. Pathetic. The word drifted down from above, followed by cruel laughter. Elena didn't look up. She knew the voice. Garrett, one of the king's elite guards. A purebred wolf with a pedigree longer than her list of daily humiliations. He wasn't even talking to her. She was so far beneath his notice that he spoke about her like she was furniture. Can't believe they still keep her around, another voice added. Half-breed trash. She doesn't even shift properly. More laughter. The sound of boots on stone as they walked away. Elena's jaw tightened, but her hands kept moving. Scrub, rinse, scrub. The rhythm was meditative, almost comforting in its predictability. She'd been doing this for 6 years, ever since her mother died and left her alone in a world that valued strength above all else. Her mother had been Omega, her father unknown. That made Elena worthless in the eyes of the pack hierarchy. Less than worthless, actually. She was a reminder that even the lowest could fall further. The Ironclaw Fortress sat in the heart of the Northern Reach, a massive stone structure built into the mountainside where the strongest wolf pack in the territory had made their home for generations. It was beautiful in a brutal way, all sharp angles and unforgiving lines, towers that pierced the sky like teeth, walls thick enough to withstand any siege. Inside those walls, power was everything. Bloodline, strength, dominance. The pack followed one law. The strong survive, and the weak serve until they break. Elena had learned to survive by becoming invisible. She finished the corridor and moved to the next section, her bucket sloshing with dirty water. The training yard was already filling with warriors preparing for morning drills. She timed her movements carefully, staying close to the walls, making herself small. It was an art form she'd perfected, the art of not being seen. Move. A foot caught her bucket, sending water splashing across the stones. Elena stumbled back, barely catching herself before she fell. Watch where you're going, half-breed. She looked up, mistake, and met the cold eyes of Seraphine Blackthorn. The noblewoman stood like a statue carved from ice and cruelty, her silver hair pulled back in an elaborate braid that probably took her handmaidens an hour to complete. She wore training leathers that cost more than Elena would earn in a lifetime, fitted perfectly to her powerful frame. Seraphine was everything the pack valued, purebred, strong, beautiful in that sharp-edged way that made men stupid and women careful. "I'm sorry, my lady," Elena said automatically, dropping her gaze. Never meet their eyes. Never challenge. Never give them a reason. "You're always sorry." Seraphine's voice dripped contempt. "Maybe if you were less sorry and more useful, you wouldn't be such a waste of resources." Elena bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste blood. She wanted to say that she worked harder than most wolves in this fortress, that she cleaned and cooked and carried and never complained, that being useful was the only thing keeping her alive. But she knew better. Words were weapons here, and she had none. "Yes, my lady." Seraphine made a disgusted sound and walked away, her boots clicking against the stone. Elena waited until she was gone before allowing herself a single, shaking breath. Then she picked up her bucket and kept working. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the training yard. Elena worked her way around the perimeter, invisible as always, while the warriors went through their drills. The sound of combat filled the air, fists hitting flesh, growls of exertion, the occasional snarl when someone's wolf side pushed too close to the surface. It was controlled chaos, a daily ritual of dominance and discipline. And then everything stopped. Elena felt it before she understood it. A shift in the air, a sudden tension that made every wolf in the yard go still. She looked up despite herself and saw the reason. Kael Draven had entered the training yard. The Alpha King moved like violence waiting to happen. He was tall, taller than most, with the kind of build that came from actual combat, not just gym training. Dark hair, darker eyes, a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't so cold. He wore simple training clothes, but there was nothing simple about the way every wolf in the yard immediately straightened, immediately focused. Power radiated from him like heat from a fire. Elena had seen him before, of course. Everyone had. You didn't live in Ironclaw Fortress without seeing the king, but she'd never been this close, never been in the yard when he came to train. She started to edge toward the exit, moving slowly so as not to draw attention. His eyes found hers. Elena froze. It was impossible. There were 50 wolves in this yard, all of them stronger, more important, more worthy of notice. But Kael Draven was looking directly at her, his dark gaze locked on her face with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. The moment stretched. Around them, the training yard had gone completely silent. Elena could feel every eye turning toward her, confusion and suspicion thick in the air. Why was the king looking at the half-breed servant? What had she done? Nothing. She'd done nothing. She was nobody. But Kael Draven was still looking at her like she was something more. You. His voice carried across the yard, deep and commanding. What's your name? Elena's mouth went dry. This couldn't be happening. Kings didn't speak to servants. They definitely didn't speak to half-breed servants who spent their days scrubbing floors. Answer your king. That was Garrett, stepping forward with a sneer. Or have you forgotten basic respect along with basic dignity? Elena, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena Voss, your majesty. Kael's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or assessment. He studied her for another long moment, and Elena had the strangest sensation of being truly seen for the first time in years. Not looked at, seen. Every scar, every defense, every desperate survival instinct laid bare under that dark gaze. Then he turned away. Continue, he said to the training master, and just like that the spell broke. The yard came back to life. Warriors returned to their drills. The world kept turning. But Elena stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs because she knew that everything had just changed. She was no longer invisible. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety and confused whispers. By lunch, half the fortress had heard that the king had spoken to Elena Voss. By dinner, the other half had added their own embellishments to the story. She'd seduced him with magic. She'd been caught stealing. She'd insulted a noble and was being called out for punishment. Elena kept her head down and tried to work, but she could feel the weight of attention on her shoulders like a physical thing. Other servants gave her a wide berth, as if whatever had drawn the king's notice might be contagious. The cook, normally kind to her, barely acknowledged her presence when she came to help with dinner prep. You should leave, the old woman muttered, her hands busy with bread dough. Nothing good comes from catching a king's eye. Elena wanted to argue that she hadn't caught anything, that it was random, meaningless, already forgotten. But the words stuck in her throat because part of her, a small reckless part she usually kept buried deep, wondered if it was true. She finished her evening duties and retreated to her small room in the servants' quarters, a narrow space barely big enough for a bed and a trunk, with a single window that looked out onto the fortress wall. It was cold and spare, and hers. She closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing herself to shake. What had he seen? When Kael Draven looked at her, what had he seen? She caught her reflection in the small mirror above her wash basin. Pale skin that never quite fit in among the tanned, healthy wolves. Dark circles under her eyes from too many early mornings and late nights. Hair that was somewhere between brown and black, usually tied back in a practical braid. She looked tired. She looked ordinary. She looked like exactly what she was, a half-breed servant barely holding on. A knock on the door made her jump. Elena Voss? The voice was female, crisp with authority. Open the door. Elena's stomach dropped. She recognized that tone. Not servant, not peer. Someone with power. She opened the door to find a woman in the royal household's colors, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. You've been reassigned, the woman said without preamble. Effective immediately. Gather your things. Reassigned? Elena's voice came out steady despite the panic building in her chest. To where? The king's quarters. The world tilted. There must be some mistake. I don't. No mistake. The woman's eyes held something that might have been pity. You're to clean and maintain the king's private chambers. Report to the royal wing at dawn. Don't be late. She turned and walked away before Elena could find words to protest. Elena closed the door and sat down hard on her bed, her mind racing. The king's quarters. That wasn't an assignment, it was a setup. Everyone knew the king's chambers were maintained by the most senior, most trusted household staff. Putting a half-breed servant there was either a test or a punishment, and either way, Elena was being thrown into a situation designed to destroy her. She thought about running. The fortress was huge, the territory beyond even bigger. She could disappear into the wilds, try to survive on her own. But she knew how that ended. Lone wolves didn't last long, and half-breeds even less so. So she sat in her small room and tried not to think about the morning when she would walk into the most dangerous place in the fortress and face whatever fate had been decided for her. Outside her window, the moon rose over the fortress walls, full and bright. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Lonely and fierce and free in a way Elena had never been. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and wondered if Kael Draven ever felt trapped by the walls that made him king. Dawn came too quickly. Elena stood outside the royal wing's entrance, her cleaning supplies held in white-knuckled hands, trying to control her breathing. The guard posted at the door, a massive wolf named Cormac, who'd never so much as looked at her before, gave her a once-over that made her skin crawl. "You're the new cleaning girl?" His tone suggested he'd already decided she wouldn't last the day. "King's orders are clear. Don't touch anything personal. Don't linger. Don't make noise. And definitely don't think this means anything." "Yes, sir." He opened the door. The king's quarters were nothing like Elena expected. She'd imagined something cold and martial, all stone and steel. Instead, she stepped into a space that felt almost lived in. Books lined the walls, actual books, not just military texts. A fireplace dominated one wall, unlit now, but surrounded by worn chairs that suggested actual use. The main chamber was large, but not ostentatious, furnished with pieces that prioritized function over display. It felt lonely. Elena pushed the thought away and got to work. She'd been given a list of tasks: dusting, sweeping, changing linens in the adjacent bedroom, organizing the study. She moved efficiently, keeping her head down, hyper-aware of every sound. The king was at the morning council meeting, she'd been told. She had 2 hours. She was halfway through the study when she noticed the maps. They covered an entire table, detailed charts of the territory and beyond, marked with notes in a strong, angular hand. Elena knew she shouldn't look, but curiosity won. She leaned closer, careful not to touch anything, and studied the markings. They weren't battle plans. They were trade routes, resource distributions, notes about villages and settlements, questions about supply lines and infrastructure. This wasn't the work of a warlord. This was someone trying to figure out how to actually govern. Interesting, isn't it? Elena spun around so fast she knocked into the table, sending several books sliding. Her heart stopped. Kael Draven stood in the doorway, watching her. He'd come back early, or maybe she'd lost track of time. Either way, she was caught red-handed, snooping through the king's personal work. "Your Majesty." She dropped into a clumsy bow, her face burning. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. What did you see?" It was a test. Every instinct screamed at her to lie, to deflect, to make herself small and forgettable again. But something about the way he asked, direct, almost curious, made her pause. "Trade routes," she said quietly, meeting his eyes for just a second before looking away. "Supply chains. You're trying to optimize resource distribution." Silence, long enough that Elena was certain she'd just signed her death warrant. Then, "And?" She looked up, confused. Kael had moved closer, his expression unreadable. He gestured to the maps. "You started to say something else, and..." This was insane. Kings didn't ask servants for their opinions. They definitely didn't care what a half-breed thought about governance. But he was waiting, and Elena had already crossed too many lines to stop now. "The northern route through Millbrook," she said slowly, pointing without touching. "You've marked it as primary, but there's a better option. The old mining road through the foothills. It's longer on paper, but it avoids the river crossings that flood every spring. The merchants complain about it every year. Kale stepped closer, studying the map. How do you know about the flooding? I listen. The words came out before she could stop them. People talk around servants like we're furniture. I've heard the merchants argue about routes 100 times in the kitchens. Something changed in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes. He reached past her and traced the alternate route she'd mentioned. Show me. So she did. And for the next hour, Elena forgot to be afraid. She forgot she was a servant and he was a king. She just talked about the things she'd observed over years of being invisible, the patterns she'd noticed, the small inefficiencies that added up to big problems. Kyle listened, asked sharp questions, made notes. It felt like being real. You're wasted as a cleaning girl, he said finally, and there was something in his voice Elena couldn't quite place. I'm lucky to have any position at all, she said automatically, then winced. That sounded bitter. But Kyle just looked at her, really looked, with that same intensity from the training yard. Why do you stay? The question caught her off guard. Where else would I go? Anywhere. You're not bound here. Half-breeds aren't subject to pack law the same way. Half-breeds aren't protected by it either. Elena heard the exhaustion in her own voice. Out there, I'm prey. In here, I'm at least something. Invisible, Kyle said softly. It's safer that way. He studied her for another long moment, then seemed to reach some kind of decision. I'm increasing your hours. I want you here every morning. The cleaning is secondary. I need someone who actually pays attention to how this place runs. Elena's mind reeled. Your Majesty, that's not... People will talk. People always talk. His voice went hard. I need information more than I need their approval. Can you do this or not? It was a trap. It had to be. You didn't elevate servants without reason, especially not servants like her. But the alternative was refusing a direct order from the king, which had only one outcome. Yes, she heard herself say. I can do this. Good. Start tomorrow. Same time. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. And Elena? Don't change anything about how you move through this fortress. Stay invisible. That's what makes you valuable. Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone in his study, surrounded by maps and books and the lingering scent of pine and winter air. She sank into one of the chairs, her hands shaking. What had she just agreed to? The next week passed in a strange new rhythm. Elena continued her regular duties during the day, scrubbing floors, hauling water, staying beneath notice. But every morning before dawn, she slipped into the king's quarters and spent 2 hours with Kyle, discussing everything from supply issues to personnel problems to the political tensions brewing between noble families. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it was the only part of her day that felt real. Kyle, she discovered, was nothing like the cold tyrant she'd imagined. He was tired, drowning in responsibility he'd never asked for, trying to hold together a pack that valued strength over sense. He'd inherited the throne young after his father's death in battle, and he'd spent the last 8 years fighting to modernize a system built on traditions that no longer worked. They want me to choose a mate, he said one morning, his voice flat, at the grand gathering next month. A political alliance with one of the noble families. Elena kept her eyes on the map they were working on, marking new settlement boundaries. Is that standard? It's expected. The pack wants a queen, someone strong, connected, capable of producing an heir. He said it like reciting a shopping list. What do you want? The question hung in the air. Elena realized too late how personal it was, how far beyond her place. But Kyle didn't seem angry. I want someone who won't see me as a prize to be won, he said quietly. Someone who doesn't want the crown. Someone real. Their eyes met across the table and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. They were both trapped by what they were, both playing roles that didn't fit, both desperately lonely in ways they couldn't admit. Elena looked away first, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. This was dangerous, more dangerous than anything she'd faced before. The gathering, she said, forcing her voice steady. Who are the likely candidates? Seraphine Blackthorn leads the pack. Kale's tone went carefully neutral. Strong bloodline, military training, extensive political connections. She's been preparing for this role since childhood. Of course it was Seraphine. Elena remembered the noblewoman's cold eyes, her casual cruelty. She would be a perfect queen by pack standards. Powerful, beautiful, ruthless. "She'll eat you alive," Elena said before she could stop herself. Kale's laugh was sharp and genuine. "Probably, but at least the nobles would be happy." "Would you?" Happiness isn't part of the king's job description. Elena wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Kings didn't get to choose, they got to survive. Over the following days, their conversations shifted. Less about politics, more about everything else. Kale told her about growing up in the shadow of his father's expectations, about the weight of being responsible for thousands of lives. Elena found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone, what it felt like to be neither human nor wolf, to belong nowhere, to build your entire existence around staying unnoticed. "You notice everything," Kale observed one morning. "How people move, what they're not saying. It's like you see through them." "Survival skill," Elena said. "When you are invisible, you learn to read the room. It's the only way to avoid getting crushed." "And what do you see when you look at me?" The question was quiet, almost vulnerable. Elena looked up and found Kyle watching her with an openness he never showed in public. Here, in the early morning quiet of his study, the mask was gone. He wasn't the Alpha King. He was just a man, lonely and tired and carrying too much weight on his shoulders. "I see someone who's drowning," she said honestly. "Someone who wants to do the right thing but doesn't know what that is anymore. Someone who's forgotten how to be just himself." Kale's eyes held hers. "And when I look at you, I see the first person in years who tells me the truth instead of what I want to hear." Something shifted between them. Elena felt it like a physical pull, magnetic and terrifying. This wasn't supposed to happen. Servants didn't connect with kings. Half-breeds didn't matter to alphas. This was breaking every rule, crossing every line. But neither of them looked away. A knock at the door shattered the moment. They sprang apart as if burned. "Enter!" Kale called, his voice instantly back to that commanding tone. Garrett stepped in, his expression sour when he saw Elena. "Your Majesty, the council is waiting, and Lady Seraphine has requested an audience." "Tell them I'll be there shortly." Garrett's eyes lingered on Elena with open hostility before he bowed and left. The door closed behind him with a definitive click. Elena gathered her things quickly. "I should go." "Elena." She stopped, her hand on the doorknob. "Be careful," Kyle said. "People are starting to notice. They're asking questions." "I know." She did know. The whispers had gotten louder, the looks more pointed. Other servants avoided her now. Even the cook had stopped speaking to her entirely. "If it becomes too dangerous, I'll handle it." Elena cut him off, surprised by her own firmness. "I've been handling this my whole life." Kale looked like he wanted to argue, but he just nodded. "Tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning," she confirmed, and slipped out of the royal wing before she could do something stupid like look back. She made it 3 steps before Seraphine materialized from a side corridor. Well, see." The noblewoman's smile was razor sharp. "The little half-breed seems to have found herself a cozy position. Tell me, what exactly are you doing in the king's chambers every morning?" Elena kept her expression blank. "Cleaning, my lady." "Is that what we're calling it?" Seraphine circled her like a predator. "You know, it's fascinating. I've watched you for years, scurrying around like the rat you are. Never thought you'd be stupid enough to aim above your station." "I don't know what you mean, my lady." "Don't play innocent. Whatever you think you're doing with the king, it ends now." Seraphine leaned close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He needs a real mate. Someone worthy, not some pathetic half-breed who can barely shift." Elena met her eyes. It was a mistake. She knew it was a mistake. But she was tired of backing down, tired of being small. "Then you have nothing to worry about," she said quietly. "Do you?" Seraphine's face went cold. For a moment, Elena thought she might actually attack. Then the noblewoman smiled, slow and dangerous. "You just made a very big mistake, little girl. I'm going to enjoy watching you fall." She swept away, leaving Elena standing in the empty corridor with her heart pounding. It had begun. The dangerous game she'd known was coming from the moment Kyle first looked at her across the training yard, and Elena, who'd spent 6 years perfecting the art of invisibility, had just painted a target on her back that the whole fortress could see. She pressed her hand against the cold stone wall and tried to remember how to breathe. Tomorrow morning, she'd be back in Kyle's study, back in the only place she felt real. But tonight, Elena Voss was more alone than she'd ever been. And somewhere in the fortress, Seraphine Blackthorn was already planning her destruction. The bruise bloomed purple across Elena's ribs by morning. She discovered it while dressing in the pre-dawn darkness, her fingers finding the tender spot where she'd been shoved into a wall the night before. Not Seraphine. The noblewoman was too smart to dirty her own hands. No, this had been one of her followers, a beta wolf named Marcus, who'd cornered Elena in the laundry room with a message. "Stay away from the king, half-breed. Next time it won't be just a warning." Elena pressed carefully around the bruise, testing the damage. Nothing broken. She'd had worse. She pulled on her plain work dress and wrapped her shawl tight against the morning cold, then made her way through the silent fortress toward the royal wing. The guard at the door was different today. Younger, less hostile. He barely looked at her as he led her through, which Elena took as a small mercy. Inside, she found Kyle already awake, standing at the window with a cup of something that smelled like strong tea. "You're limping," he said without turning around. Elena froze. She'd been so careful to hide it. "I'm fine." "You're lying." He turned to face her, and his eyes went immediately to the way she held her left side. "What happened?" "Nothing. I slipped on the stairs." "Elena." His voice dropped into that tone that wasn't quite a command but expected obedience anyway. The truth. She wanted to lie again. Every survival instinct screamed at her to deflect, minimize, protect herself. But something about the genuine concern in his eyes made her tired of pretending. "Someone delivered a message," she said quietly, "about staying in my place." Kale's expression went very still, very dangerous. "Who?" "It doesn't matter. It matters to me. And that's the problem." The words burst out before Elena could stop them. "You caring about what happens to a servant is exactly what's making this worse. Every time you notice me, every time you treat me like I'm more than furniture, it paints a bigger target on my back." "So I should ignore you? Pretend you don't exist?" "Yes!" Elena heard the desperation in her own voice. "That's how this works. That's how I survive." Kyle set down his cup with careful precision. "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because you're the only honest thing in this entire fortress." He moved closer, and Elena had to fight the urge to step back. "Everyone else tells me what I want to hear or what serves their agenda. You tell me the truth even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs you." "It's going to cost me more than a bruise if this continues." "Then I'll assign you protection." "No." Elena cut him off. "That makes it worse. You can't protect me without proving their suspicions right. The best thing you can do is let this, whatever this is, end before it destroys us both." The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither could say. Kyle's jaw tightened, and for a moment Elena thought he might actually agree. Then his expression shifted into something harder, more resolved. "Come with me." He walked toward his private chambers, the bedroom she was supposed to clean but never entered when he was present. Elena hesitated, then followed. The room was sparse, almost monastic. A large bed with military neat covers, a wardrobe, a desk by the window. Nothing personal except a single photograph on the nightstand. A younger Kyle with an older man who had to be his father, both unsmiling. Kale opened the wardrobe and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was an assortment of items that looked oddly random. A worn leather journal, a child's carved wolf figurine, a woman's ring. "My mother's," he said, touching the ring. "She died when I was 7. My father kept it locked away like it was shameful to remember her." He picked up the journal. This was hers too. Poetry, observations, questions about how the pack was run. My father called it weakness. Said she was too soft to be a queen. Elena didn't know what to say. Kyle had never mentioned his mother before. "She used to tell me that strength wasn't just about power," he continued, his voice distant with memory. that the strongest wolves were the ones who could be gentle without fear. My father beat that idea out of me pretty thoroughly after she was gone. Why are you telling me this? Kael looked at her directly. Because you remind me of her. Not in appearance, you look nothing alike, but the way you see things, the way you refuse to let this place make you cruel. He closed the box carefully. My father would have hated that I'm talking to you. He would have called it weakness, and maybe he'd be right, but I'm tired of living by his definitions. Elena's throat felt tight. Kael, I'm not asking you to risk yourself, he said. I'm asking you to trust me. Let me handle this my way. Your way gets me killed. My way keeps you alive. His voice went hard with certainty. I'm the Alpha King. I decide who has value in this pack, not Seraphine Blackthorn or anyone else. And I say, you're under my protection. It was the worst thing he could have said. The most dangerous. And Elena felt something warm and terrified unfold in her chest, because part of her, the part that had been invisible and unwanted her entire life, wanted desperately to believe him. This is a mistake, she whispered. Probably. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. But I'm making it anyway. Before Elena could respond, footsteps sounded in the outer chamber. They both tensed. Kael moved to the door just as someone knocked. Your Majesty? A woman's voice, professional and cold. Lady Seraphine is here for her scheduled meeting. Kael's expression shuddered immediately. I'll be right there. He turned back to Elena. Stay here. Use the servant's exit when you leave. Then he was gone, and Elena was alone in the king's bedroom, with her heart pounding and her mind racing. She'd just crossed another line. How many more before there was no going back? She pressed her hand against the bruise on her ribs and wondered if protection from a king was worth the price she'd have to pay. Tut! The fortress buzzed with news of the grand gathering. 3 weeks away now, and preparations consumed everyone's attention. The Great Hall was being renovated, guest quarters prepared, alliances negotiated behind closed doors. It was all anyone could talk about. Who would attend, what alliances would be forged, and most importantly, who Kael Draven would choose as his queen. Elena tried to stay focused on her work, but it was impossible to ignore, especially when Seraphine seemed to be everywhere, always perfectly positioned to remind everyone of her suitability for the role. The Blackthorn family has served this pack for 7 generations, Elena overheard her saying to a group of visiting nobles one afternoon. My bloodline is impeccable, my training extensive. I understand what it means to be a queen. The nobles made approving sounds. Of course they did. Seraphine was everything they valued: strength, beauty, political connections. She was the obvious choice. And Elena was the servant scrubbing floors 10 feet away, invisible as always. Except she wasn't invisible anymore. Several of the nobles glanced her way, their expressions ranging from curious to contemptuous. Word had spread further than she'd realized. The whispers followed her through the corridors now, barely concealed. That's the one the king speaks to. Half-breed trash with delusions. Give it time. He'll come to his senses. Elena kept her head down and worked. What else could she do? Her mornings with Kael continued, though they were different now, more careful. He never touched her, never said anything that could be misinterpreted, but the connection between them grew stronger anyway. They fell into an easy rhythm, Elena reporting what she'd observed around the fortress, Kael working through problems with her insight, both of them pretending this was purely professional. But it wasn't. Elena knew it wasn't. She saw it in the way Kael's expression softened when she entered the room, in the way he laughed at her dry observations about pack politics, in the long silences that felt more like conversations than words ever could. She was falling for him, stupidly, dangerously, completely falling for a man she could never have. You're distracted today, Kael observed one morning. They were reviewing supply requisitions, boring work that usually kept Elena focused. Sorry, long night. More messages? She hesitated, then nodded. The incidents had escalated, spoiled food in her quarters, her bedding slashed, small, vicious reminders that she wasn't wanted. Kael's hands clenched into fists. I can stop this. No. Elena met his eyes. You can't. The more you defend me, the worse it gets. They need to see me as irrelevant, not as someone under royal protection. You're not irrelevant. To them I am, and that's how it has to stay. She forced herself back to the requisitions. Now, about the grain shipment from the Western Territories. Kale let her change the subject, but she could feel his frustration radiating across the table. He wanted to fix this. He was a king. Fixing problems was what he did. But this problem had no easy solution, and they both knew it. The morning passed too quickly. It always did. When the bells chimed 8, Elena gathered her materials and stood to leave. Elena, Kale's voice stopped her at the door. The gathering, you'll be working it? I'm assigned to the kitchens? Yes. He nodded slowly, something complicated crossing his face. I need you to understand something. What happens that night, the choice I make, it's political. It has to be. Elena's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice steady. Of course. You're the king. You do what's best for the pack. That's not what I... He stopped, frustrated. I just need you to know that none of this is about what I want. I know. And she did. That was the worst part. It's okay, Kale. I'm not expecting anything. Liar, whispered a voice in her head. You're expecting everything. But she left before he could see the truth on her face. 2 weeks before the gathering, everything went wrong at once. It started with Garrett. Elena was carrying linens through the training wing when he stepped into her path, his expression ugly with contempt. You need to leave, he said without preamble. Pack your things and get out of the fortress. Elena's arms tightened on the linens. I have duties. You have delusions. He moved closer, using his size to intimidate. You actually think the king cares about you? Your entertainment, half-breed. A curiosity. The moment he chooses a real mate, you'll be discarded like the trash you are. The words hit harder than they should have. Elena knew they were designed to hurt, knew Garrett was just another of Seraphine's tools, but knowing didn't make them sting less. I'm not trying to be anything, she said quietly. I'm just doing my job. Your job? Garrett laughed, harsh and mocking. Is that what you call warming the king's bed? It doesn't matter what you've done. It matters what everyone thinks you've done. He leaned in close enough that she could smell the aggression on him. Leave now, or I'll make sure you leave in pieces. A growl cut through the air. Kyle stood at the end of the corridor, and the fury on his face made Elena's blood go cold. She'd never seen him like this, barely controlled, violent simmering just beneath the surface. The alpha in him was showing, and it was terrifying. Step away from her, Kale said, his voice deadly quiet. Garrett paled, but didn't move. Your Majesty, I said step away. This time Garrett obeyed, practically stumbling backward. The linens fell from Elena's arms, forgotten. You will never speak to her again, Kale continued, moving forward with predatory grace. You will never look at her. You will forget she exists. And if I hear that you've violated this order in any way, I will have you exiled. Do you understand? Yes, Your Majesty. Get out of my sight. Garrett fled. Elena stood frozen, watching Kale struggle to regain control. His hands were shaking slightly, his breathing uneven. You can't do that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I just did. You proved them right. Frustration and fear made her voice sharp. You defended me publicly. Now everyone will know for certain that there's something between us. Good. The word hung in the air between them. Elena stared at him, not comprehending. Good? She repeated. Kale turned to face her fully. I'm tired of pretending, tired of caring what they think, tired of watching you suffer because I'm too much of a coward to... He stopped himself, but the words hung unspoken anyway. Elena felt the world shifting beneath her feet. This couldn't be happening. Kings didn't choose servants. Alphas didn't fall for half-breeds. This was impossible. Don't, she said desperately. Don't say what you're about to say. Why not? Because it changes nothing. Her voice cracked. You're still the king. I'm still nobody. The gathering is still in 2 weeks, and you're still going to choose someone appropriate because that's what kings do. This, us. It's not real. It can't be real. It feels pretty real to me. Elena wanted to scream, or cry, or both. Instead, she just stood there, drowning in the impossibility of it all. I should go, she managed finally. Elena, I can't do this. She backed away, leaving the linen scattered on the floor. I can't be the reason you make a mistake that destroys everything you've built. I won't. She turned and walked away before he could respond, before she could see his expression, before she could let herself hope for something that would only end in ruin. Behind her, she heard Kyle say her name one more time, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The next morning, Elena didn't go to the king's quarters. She told herself it was the right choice, the safe choice, the only choice that didn't end with her destroyed and Kyle's rule compromised. She went about her regular duties, scrubbing floors and hauling water, trying to become invisible again. But at dawn plus 10 minutes, a guard appeared at the laundry room door. The king requests your presence. It wasn't a request. Elena followed him through the fortress, aware of every eye tracking her movement. When she entered Kyle's study, she found him standing at the window, his back rigid with tension. You didn't come, he said without turning around. I thought it was better. Better for who? He spun to face her. For them? For the pack? Or for you? Elena flinched at the accusation. For both of us. Don't decide what's better for me. The anger in his voice was laced with something raw, hurt, maybe. I'm surrounded by people who make decisions for me every day. What I wear, what I eat, who I see, how I rule. I thought you were different. I am different, Elena shot back. I'm the one who's actually thinking about consequences. Do you know what they'll do to me if this continues? Not just harassment, not just threats. They'll kill me, Kyle. Maybe not directly, maybe they'll make it look like an accident, but I'll end up dead. And you'll be forced to marry Seraphine or someone like her anyway, and all of this will have been for nothing. The words spilled out in a rush, all the fear and frustration she'd been holding back. Kyle stared at her, and she watched emotions war across his face. Anger, understanding, resignation. I can protect you, he said finally, but there was doubt in his voice now. Can you? Really? Elena moved closer, desperate to make him understand. You're one man. A powerful man, yes, but still just one. The entire pack structure is against us. The nobles want a political alliance. The warriors want a strong queen. Even the servants think I'm overstepping. How do you fight that? By changing the system. That takes years, decades, and in the meantime, I'm a target. Kale's jaw tightened. So what do you want me to do? Choose Seraphine? Pretend this means nothing? I want you to be smart. Elena's voice dropped. I want you to survive this. Build your alliances, strengthen your position, change what you can change. And I'll do what I do best. Stay invisible, stay alive, and maybe someday... She couldn't finish the sentence. Someday what? Someday the pack would accept a half-breed queen? It sounded ridiculous, even in her own head, but Kyle was looking at her like she'd just suggested surrender. No. No? I'm not giving up on this. On you. He moved closer, and Elena's breath caught. I've spent 8 years doing what everyone else wanted. Becoming the king they needed, building the alliances they demanded. And I'm empty, Elena. Completely empty. Until you. Kyle, let me finish. His hand came up like he might touch her face, then dropped. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make it safe for you, but I know I can't go back to pretending you don't matter. So we figure it out. Together. Elena wanted to believe him so badly it physically hurt, but she'd learned young that wanting something didn't make it possible. The gathering, she said. What happens at the gathering? Kale's expression went carefully blank. I make a choice. And that choice is? I don't know yet. It was the most honest answer he could give and the most terrifying, because it meant he was actually considering the impossible, choosing her over political stability, personal desire over pack necessity. It would destroy them both. Promise me something, Elena said quietly. Promise me you'll think about more than just what you want. Think about the pack, the territory, everything you've built. Don't throw it away for what? For you? His voice was rough. You're not some trivial thing, Elena. You matter. To me, you matter more than any of it. The words hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying. Elena felt tears sting her eyes and blinked them back furiously. I should go, she whispered. This time Kyle didn't try to stop her. But as she reached the door, his voice followed her. I'm not giving up on this. Elena closed her eyes, her hand on the doorknob. Maybe you should. She left before he could argue, before she could see his face, before she could let herself believe in impossible things. Outside, the fortress was waking up. Servants moved through corridors, warriors headed to training, nobles gathered for breakfast. The machine of pack life turning as it always had, indifferent to the small dramas of individuals. Elena made it halfway to the servant quarters before Seraphine appeared from a side corridor, flanked by two other nobles. There was triumph in her eyes. Well, well, the little half-breed couldn't stay away after all. She circled Elena like a shark scenting blood. You just had to keep pushing, didn't you? Elena said nothing. There was nothing to say. It's almost admirable, Seraphine continued. The audacity. Thinking you could actually compete for something so far above your station. She leaned in close. But here's what you don't understand. Even if the king is foolish enough to think he cares about you, it doesn't matter. The pack will never accept you. Ever. You could be crowned queen tomorrow, and by nightfall you'd be dead. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Seraphine's smile was ice. You have until the gathering to leave on your own. After that, I'll make sure you leave in a way that sends a very clear message about what happens to those who forget their place. She swept away, her companions following. Elena stood alone in the corridor, her ribs aching where Marcus had shoved her, her heart aching from everything else. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks until everything exploded, 2 weeks to decide if love was worth dying for. The days blurred together in a haze of fear and determination. Elena continued her duties, continued her morning sessions with Kael despite the danger, continued to exist in a space that wanted her erased. The harassment escalated, more vandalism, more threats, more incidents that left marks on her body and spirit. But something else was happening too. Small things, barely noticeable. Other servants started leaving her extra food when no one was looking. A lower-ranked wolf named Thomas helped her carry water without being asked. The cook, silent for weeks, slipped her a salve for her bruises with a whispered, "Be careful, girl." They didn't approve, but they didn't all hate her either. Kael noticed the new injuries, of course. Each one made him harder, colder, more dangerous. Elena watched him transform into someone she barely recognized, the ruthless Alpha King who'd ruled before she came into his life. He was building toward something, she realized. Some decision that would change everything. It terrified her. 1 week before the gathering, he called a special council meeting. Elena wasn't invited, but she heard about it from the whispers that followed. Kael had made an announcement about the selection process. He would consider all suitable candidates. He would make his choice known at the gathering itself, not before. He would not be swayed by political pressure. The nobles left that meeting looking smug. They'd heard what they wanted to hear, that Kael was being rational, that he would choose appropriately. Only Elena knew better. She saw the determination in his eyes that night when she came to his quarters, the way he wouldn't quite meet her gaze. "What are you planning?" she asked. Something either very brave or very stupid. He finally looked at her. Probably both. "Kael, don't try to talk me out of it." His voice was gentle but firm. "I've made my choice. I made it weeks ago. I was just too afraid to admit it." Elena's chest tightened. "This will destroy you." "Maybe. Or maybe it'll be the first real thing I've done in 8 years. He moved closer, and this time he did touch her, just his hand on her cheek, warm and certain. "I'm tired of being afraid, Elena. Tired of living by their rules. Tired of pretending this doesn't matter." "It matters too much," she whispered. "That's the problem. Then we make it matter enough to change things." Before she could respond, before she could argue or plead or do anything, Kael kissed her. It was soft and desperate and completely impossible. Elena's mind screamed warnings, even as her body melted into him, even as her hands found his shoulders, even as she kissed him back like he was oxygen and she was drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. 1 week, Kael said quietly. In 1 week, I'm going to make a choice that will either change everything or destroy us both. I need to know. If I do this, will you stand with me? It was the question Elena had been avoiding since the moment he first looked at her across the training yard. Stand with him meant death. Stand with him meant war. Stand with him meant betting everything on an impossible dream, But walk away meant living half a life, always wondering what might have been. Elena thought about her mother, who'd loved a man she couldn't have and died alone. She thought about all the years of being invisible, of surviving but never living. She thought about Kael's hand on her face and the way he looked at her like she mattered. "Yes," she heard herself say. "I'll stand with you." Kael's expression cracked open with something that looked like relief and terror combined. "Even if it means even then." He kissed her again, harder this time, like he was trying to memorize the moment. When they separated, his forehead rested against hers. "7 days," he murmured. "7 days," Elena agreed. And somewhere in the fortress, Seraphine Blackthorn sharpened her knives and planned for war. The gathering began with fire. Torches lined the great hall in rows of flickering amber, casting dancing shadows across stone walls that had witnessed centuries of pack rituals. Elena watched from the kitchen entrance, her hands gripping a tray of crystal glasses so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Beyond the serving doors, the elite of 5 territories gathered in their finest. Silk and leather, gold and steel, power draped across shoulders like cloaks. She shouldn't be here. The head cook had tried to keep her in the back, away from the main event. But Elena had volunteered for serving duty. She needed to see, needed to witness the moment Kael made his choice, even if watching it would break something inside her that could never be repaired. "Move, half-breed!" A server shouldered past her, sneering. "You're blocking the door." Elena stepped aside, her heart hammering. Through the gap, she caught a glimpse of the raised platform at the hall's center. Kael stood there in formal regalia, black leather and silver clasp, the crown of his position resting on dark hair. He looked every inch the Alpha King, powerful and remote and completely untouchable. Nothing like the man who'd kissed her 6 days ago and whispered promises neither of them should have made. "Elena." The cook's hand landed on her shoulder. "Don't do this to yourself. Go to the scullery. I'll make an excuse." "I'm fine." "You're shaking." She was. Elena forced her hands to steady, forced her breathing to even out. "I need to see." The cook's expression softened with something like pity. "Child, nothing good comes from watching your heart get broken in public." But Elena was already moving through the doors into the heat and noise of the gathering. She kept to the walls, serving wine and clearing plates, staying invisible in the way she'd perfected over years. Except now, invisibility felt like a punishment instead of protection. The hall was packed with wolves from across the territories, alphas and their heirs, nobles draped in family colors, warriors who'd earned their place through blood. The air thrummed with barely contained aggression, the kind that came when too many predators occupied the same space. Everyone was watching Kael, measuring him, waiting. Seraphine held court near the platform, surrounded by admirers. She wore deep crimson silk that clung to her frame like a second skin, her silver hair braided with gold thread. She looked magnificent. She looked like a queen. "The Blackthorn Alliance would secure the western trade routes," Elena heard a noble say to his companion. "Smart choice politically." "And she's strong," another added. "Proper bloodline. The pack would accept her immediately." Of course they would. Seraphine was everything they wanted. Beautiful, powerful, ruthless enough to match Kael's strength. She would rule beside him without question, without complication. She would give the pack stability. Elena served wine to a group of visiting alphas and tried not to feel sick. The evening wore on. Toasts were made, alliances discussed in quiet corners, old rivalries temporarily set aside in the name of ceremony. As midnight approached, the crowd began to press closer to the platform. This was it, the moment everyone had been waiting for. Kael raised his hand and the hall fell silent. Even the torches seemed to dim, as if holding their breath. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice carrying across the space with natural authority. "Tonight marks more than a gathering. It marks the future of this pack, this territory, this way of life." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Seraphine smiled, confident and cold. "Tradition demands I choose a mate from among the suitable candidates," Kael continued. "Someone of strong blood, political connection, proven worth." Elena felt something inside her start to crack. This was it. He was going to choose Seraphine, and everything they'd shared would become a secret buried under duty and necessity. She'd been stupid to hope for anything else. But I've spent 8 years following tradition. Kael's voice changed, harder now. 8 years doing what was expected. 8 years building alliances and making choices that served everyone but myself. The murmurs shifted, uncertain now. Elena's breath caught. I've watched this pack value strength over compassion, bloodline over character, power over truth. I've enforced laws that protect the strong and crush the weak. I've been the king you needed. He paused, and his eyes swept the crowd. But I've failed to be the king you deserve. Confusion rippled through the hall. Seraphine's smile faltered. So tonight, I'm making a different choice. Kael stepped down from the platform and began walking through the crowd. Wolves parted before him, uncertain and wary. Elena pressed herself against the wall, her heart in her throat, because he was moving in her direction, and this couldn't be happening. His eyes found hers across the hall. Time stopped. Elena Voss, Kael said, his voice carrying clearly. Come here. The hall erupted. Voices rose in shock and outrage, confusion and disbelief. Someone laughed, sharp and cruel, like this had to be a joke. Elena stood frozen, every instinct screaming at her to run, to hide, to disappear like she'd always done. But Kael was still looking at her, and in his eyes she saw the same terror and determination she felt in her own chest. Elena, he said again, gentler this time. Please. Her feet moved without permission, carrying her through a crowd that parted like she carried plague. Faces blurred past, shock, disgust, fury, confusion. She registered Seraphine's expression of pure murderous rage, registered the way nobles clutched their wine glasses like weapons. Then she was standing in front of Kael, in the center of the hall, in front of hundreds of witnesses, completely exposed. Have you lost your mind? The shout came from somewhere in the crowd. She thought maybe Garrett. She's nobody, half-breed trash. She's the only person in this fortress who sees me as more than a crown, Kael said, not looking away from Elena. His hand came up, not quite touching her face. The only one who tells me the truth instead of what I want to hear. The only one who cares about the wolves at the bottom of our hierarchy as much as those at the top. This is insane, another voice called. You can't possibly. I can. Kael finally turned to face the crowd, and the authority in his voice silenced them. I'm your king. I make the laws, I set the precedent, and I say that worth isn't determined by bloodline alone. Elena Voss has more courage, more compassion, more genuine strength than anyone in this room. She's weak. Seraphine's voice cut through like a blade. She pushed forward, her face twisted with rage barely contained. She can barely shift. She has no family, no connections, no power. You'd make her queen? You'd put half-breed bastard on the throne beside you? The words hit Elena like physical blows. Every insecurity, every fear, every reason this could never work laid bare in front of everyone. She's stronger than you'll ever be, Kael said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Because she survived in a world designed to destroy her, and she did it without becoming cruel, without becoming what you are. Seraphine's hand went to the knife at her belt. Around the hall, tensions ratcheted higher. Elena could feel violence building in the air like electricity before a storm. Kael, she whispered, her voice lost in the noise. This was a mistake. No. He finally looked at her again. This is the first right thing I've done. They'll kill us both. Probably. Something that might have been a smile touched his lips. But at least we'll go down fighting for something real. Then he did touch her, his hand cupping her face in front of everyone, and Elena forgot how to breathe. I'm asking you, Kael said quietly, just for her. Not commanding, not expecting, asking. Will you stand beside me? Will you help me build something better than this broken system? Will you be my queen? Elena looked at him, really looked, and saw everything she'd been too afraid to believe in. Love, partnership, the possibility of change. It was terrifying and impossible and completely insane, but it was also the only real thing she'd ever been offered. Yes, she whispered. The hall exploded. Nobles shouted over each other, voices raised in protest and outrage. Several wolves shifted partially, their anger bleeding into animal aggression. Seraphine screamed something incomprehensible, her face contorted with fury. The visiting alphas looked at each other in shock, uncertain whether to intervene or flee. This is an outrage. The oldest noble, a silver-haired alpha named Thorn, pushed forward. King or not, you cannot make this choice. The pack will never accept, then the pack can challenge me. Kael cut him off, his voice ringing with authority. Any who disagree with my choice, step forward now. Face me directly. The hall went silent. Challenging the Alpha King wasn't symbolic. It was combat to submission or death. And Kael had never lost a challenge. No one moved. That's what I thought. Kael's arm went around Elena's waist, pulling her close. Elena Voss is under my protection. Anyone who threatens her threatens me directly. Anyone who harms her will answer to me personally. Is that clear? Still silence. But Elena could feel the hate radiating from every corner of the hall. This wasn't acceptance. This was fear holding back violence. The gathering is over, Kael announced. Return to your territories. Think carefully about your next moves. The crowd began to disperse slowly and with clear reluctance. Wolves filed out in groups, their conversations hushed but intense. Elena caught fragments as they passed. Complete disaster. Throwing away everything. Won't last a month. Seraphine was the last to leave. She stopped in front of Elena, her eyes promising death. Enjoy your victory while it lasts, half-breed, she said quietly, because I promise you, you won't see winter. Then she was gone, and Elena was left standing in the emptying hall with Kael's arm around her and the weight of what they'd just done crushing down on both of them. That went well, Kael said dryly. Elena let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. We're going to die. Maybe. He turned her to face him. But we're going to die together. Before Elena could respond, footsteps echoed across the hall. The head of Kael's personal guard, a scarred warrior named Maven who'd served 3 kings, approached with her expression carefully neutral. Your Majesty, she said, we need to talk, privately. They followed her to a small council room off the main hall. Maven closed the door and leaned against it, her arms crossed. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen, she said slowly, or the stupidest. Both, Kael admitted. Do you understand what you've just done? The alliances you've destroyed, the enemies you've made. Yes. Maven's eyes shifted to Elena, assessment sharp and quick. And you? Do you have any idea what you've agreed to? Elena lifted her chin. I know I'm now the most hated person in 5 territories. I know half the nobles want me dead. I know I'm completely unprepared for any of this. Good. Maven's expression softened slightly. At least you're not delusional. That gives you better odds than I expected. She turned back to Kael. The Blackthorn family will move against you. Probably several others too. You've made yourself vulnerable in ways that will take years to repair. I know. And you're willing to risk your crown for this? Kael looked at Elena, something fierce and certain in his eyes. The crown means nothing if I can't choose how I wear it. Maven studied them both for a long moment, then sighed. Then you're both going to need to learn fast. Elena, can you fight? I've survived this long. Surviving isn't fighting, but we'll work with it. Maven pulled away from the door. Starting tomorrow, you train with me personally. And I don't care if you're half-blood or quarter-blood or no blood at all. If you're going to be queen, you need to be able to defend yourself. Understood? Elena nodded, something like hope flickering in her chest. As for tonight, Maven continued, you'll both stay in the secure wing. I'm posting extra guards. And Elena, she met her eyes directly. You should know that not everyone disagrees with the king's choice. Some of us have been waiting a long time for someone to challenge the way things are. How many? Kael asked. Not enough. Maven's honesty was brutal. But more than 0. The lower ranks, some of the younger warriors, a few of the border guards. They see what you're trying to do. They might not fight for you yet, but they won't fight against you either. It was something. Not much, but something. Maven left them with final instructions about security protocols and emergency procedures. When the door closed, Elena sank into a chair, her legs finally giving out. That really happened, she said numbly. You really just announced to 5 territories that you're choosing a half-breed servant as your queen. I did. We're insane. Probably. Kale knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands. But I meant every word. You're the strongest person I know, Elena. Not despite what you've survived, but because of it. You understand what it means to live at the bottom of this system. That makes you exactly what we need to change it. Elena wanted to believe him. Part of her, the reckless, hopeful part she'd buried years ago, actually did believe him. But reality was brutal and immediate. Seraphine meant what she said, she whispered. I won't survive this. Then we make you strong enough to survive. Kale's grip tightened. We train you. We build alliances with the wolves who are tired of the old ways, and we prove to everyone that you deserve this position. And if we fail, then at least we tried. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. At least we stood for something real. Before Elena could respond, an explosion rocked the fortress. The blast came from somewhere below, the sound of stone cracking and fire roaring. Kyle was on his feet instantly, his body already shifting into combat mode. Elena stumbled up, her heart racing. Stay here, Kale ordered, already moving toward the door. Like hell! They ran through corridors filling with smoke, following the sound of screams and chaos. Other wolves joined them, guards and warriors responding to the attack. They burst into the main courtyard to find the western storage building engulfed in flames. People were trapped inside. Elena could hear them screaming, servants, lower-ranked wolves, anyone who'd been unlucky enough to be working late. The fire was spreading fast, fed by oil and grain stores. Get water chains organized, Kyle shouted to his warriors. Now! But Elena wasn't listening. She was staring at the burning building and thinking about all the times she'd worked late in those storage rooms, all the servants she knew who might be in there right now. While the nobles had been safe in the gathering, the people who actually kept this fortress running had been here, working, and now they were dying. Someone needs to get them out, she said. Kale grabbed her arm. It's too dangerous. The structure's compromised. They're dying in there. And you'll die if you go in. Elena looked at him, at this man who'd just risked everything to choose her, and made a decision. Then I guess we see if I'm actually strong enough to be queen. She ripped free of his grip and ran toward the burning building before he could stop her. Behind her, she heard Kyle shouting her name, heard Maven cursing, heard the chaos of wolves trying to organize a response. But Elena was already through the door, into the smoke and heat, and screaming. The world became fire and darkness. Elena pulled her shawl over her mouth and nose, her eyes streaming from smoke. The heat was incredible, like being inside a forge. Wooden beams cracked overhead, showering sparks. Help! A voice, weak and terrified, somewhere to her left. Elena followed the sound, crawling now because the smoke was thicker near the ceiling. She found a young servant girl, maybe 15, trapped under a fallen shelf. The girl's eyes were wide with terror. I've got you, Elena gasped, straining to lift the shelf. It was too heavy. The fire was spreading closer. Then hands joined hers. Thomas, the lower-ranked wolf who'd helped her with water weeks ago. Together, they lifted the shelf enough for the girl to scramble free. There's more, the girl sobbed. In the back room. They pushed deeper into the building, finding 3 more servants and a junior warrior. The smoke was so thick now Elena could barely see. Her lungs burned. The heat was unbearable. This way. Thomas led them toward a side exit, but when they got there, they found it blocked by burning debris. They were trapped. Elena's mind raced through options, each more desperate than the last. The main entrance was too far, the fire too intense. The windows were too high. They were going to die here, all of them, and her last act would be proving Seraphine right, that she was too weak to survive. The floor, Thomas said suddenly. The old cistern access. He was right. This building sat over one of the fortress's original water storage systems. There was a hatch somewhere in the back storage room. They found it under a pile of grain sacks, the wood scorched but intact. Thomas ripped it open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Go! Elena pushed the servants toward it. Move! They went down one by one, coughing and crying but moving. Elena was the last, her hands shaking on the ladder rungs. As she descended, a beam crashed down where she'd been standing seconds before. The cistern was dark and cold and blessedly smoke-free. They stumbled through it, following the sound of running water, until they found an exit that led outside the fortress walls. They emerged into the night, gasping and filthy, to find Maven and a rescue team waiting. "You idiot," Maven said, but there was something like respect in her eyes. "You beautiful, insane idiot." Elena collapsed onto the grass, her lungs screaming. Around her, the servants she'd saved were being tended to by healers. The young girl she'd pulled from under the shelf was crying, but alive. Then Kyle was there, dropping to his knees beside her, his hands running over her checking for injuries. "Never," he said roughly. "Never do that again." "Had to." Elena coughed, tasting smoke. "They were dying." "You could have died." "But I didn't." She looked up at him, saw the fear and anger and something deeper in his eyes. "I saved them, Kale. 6 lives. That has to mean something." He pulled her against his chest, his heart pounding against her ear. "It means you're going to give me a heart attack before we even make it to the coronation." Around them, wolves had gathered, warriors and servants, nobles and lower ranks. They'd watched Elena run into fire. They'd watched her emerge with survivors. And in their eyes, Elena saw something shift. Not acceptance. Not yet. But maybe possibility. Then a guard pushed through the crowd, his expression grim. "Your Majesty," he said. "You need to see this." They followed him back to the burning building, now mostly extinguished. In the wreckage near the main entrance, someone had left a message written in oil that hadn't quite burned away. "This is just the beginning." Elena stared at the words, her temporary victory turning to ash. The explosion hadn't been an accident. Someone had set this fire deliberately, timed to coincide with the gathering, and the message was clear. They'd failed this time, but there would be more attempts. "Seraphine," Maven said quietly. "We don't know that," Kyle replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "We know." Elena wrapped her arms around herself. This is what she promised, and she keeps her promises. The fortress bells began to toll, midnight. The gathering was officially over. In the distance, Elena could see the last of the visiting nobles preparing to depart, no doubt spreading word of the night's events to every corner of the territories. By morning, everyone would know. The Alpha King had chosen a half-breed servant. The pack was divided. Violence had already begun. And Elena Voss, who'd spent her whole life invisible, was now the most visible target in 5 territories. Kyle's hand found hers in the darkness, warm and certain. "We face this together." Elena looked at this burning building, at the message written in oil, at the wolves watching with expressions ranging from hope to hatred. She thought about the 6 lives she'd just saved, about the way Thomas had helped without hesitation, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, things could actually change. Then she looked at Kyle and saw her own terror reflected back at her. "Together," she agreed. But as they walked back toward the fortress, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just declared war on an enemy who'd been preparing for this battle their entire lives. And she had 7 days of survival experience to fight back with. The fire smoldered behind them, smoke rising into the night sky like a warning. This was just the beginning. Dawn broke cold and unforgiving over the Ironclaw fortress, painting the smoke-stained walls in shades of gray that matched Elena's exhaustion. She stood at the window of Kyle's private chambers, her chambers now, technically, though the thought still felt impossible, watching servants clear debris from the night's fire. Her reflection stared back from the glass, soot-streaked and hollow-eyed, looking nothing like a queen. "You should sleep," Kyle said from behind her. He hadn't slept either. Neither of them had. "Can't." Elena pressed her forehead against the cool window. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that message. This is just the beginning." Footsteps, then Kyle's warmth at her back. Not touching, just present. Maven's interrogating everyone who had access to the storage building. "We'll find who did this." "We already know who did this." Elena turned to face him. "Seraphine doesn't hide. She wants us to know it was her, wants us afraid. Are you?" "Terrified." The admission came easier than it should have. "But that's nothing new." A knock interrupted them. Maven entered without waiting for permission, her expression grim. "The council is demanding an emergency session," she said without preamble. "They're calling for Elena's removal from her position, for the safety of the pack." Elena's stomach dropped. Less than 12 hours, and they were already moving to undo everything. They can demand whatever they want, Kyle said, his voice hard. I'm not changing my decision. They have support. Maven's bluntness was almost kind in its honesty. Thorne's family, the Blackthorns, obviously, 3 of the minor noble houses. They're framing this as concern for stability. It's a power play. Of course it is. But it's a power play with momentum. Maven looked at Elena. They're saying you're a security risk, that last night's attack proves you make the pack vulnerable. The words hit like physical blows. Elena had saved 6 lives last night, had run into fire while nobles stood safe, and they were using it against her. When's the session? Kyle asked. Noon. They want a public forum. Maven hesitated. Your Majesty, they're going to make a case for formal challenge. If enough nobles support them, I'll face any challenge they want to make. They're not challenging you, they're challenging her. Maven's eyes locked on Elena. Pack law allows for challenges to a chosen mate if enough alphas agree the choice threatens stability. They don't have to beat you, they just have to prove she's unworthy. The room fell silent. Elena understood immediately what that meant. They'd put her on trial in front of the entire pack, dissect every weakness, every failure, every reason she didn't belong. And she'd have to defend herself against wolves who'd been training for combat since birth while she'd been scrubbing floors. No, Kyle said flatly. I won't let them. You don't have a choice. Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. If you refuse the challenge, they'll use it as proof that I'm weak, that you're protecting me because I can't protect myself. You shouldn't have to prove anything. But I do. Elena moved away from the window, away from him. That's reality. I'm a half-breed servant who you elevated to queen in one night. Every wolf in this territory thinks I don't deserve it. So I prove them wrong or I prove them right. Those are my options. Maven was watching her with that same assessment from last night. What are you thinking? I'm thinking. Elena's mind raced through possibilities, each more desperate than the last. Then something clicked. I'm thinking they want to challenge me on their terms. Combat, strength, dominance, all the things I'm weakest at. So I don't fight on their terms. Elena looked at Kyle. What does this pack actually need right now? What's the real threat? He understood immediately. The fire destroyed 1/3 of our winter stores. We've got supply shortages coming and no time to replenish before the first snow. And the nobles are so busy fighting over power that no one's actually addressing it. Elena felt pieces falling into place. A plan forming from desperation and stubborn refusal to give up. I can't beat them in combat, but maybe I can beat them at actually governing. Maven's expression shifted to something like approval. You want to solve their problem before they can use it against you. I want to show them that being queen isn't about bloodline or fighting skill. It's about giving a damn what happens to the wolves everyone else forgets about. Kale moved closer, something fierce in his eyes. What do you need? Access to the supply records, a list of every village and settlement in our territory. And, Elena hesitated, Thomas, that wolf who helped me in the fire, I need to talk to him. The lower rank? Maven looked skeptical. Why? Because he's been at the bottom of this system his whole life. He knows things nobles don't even think to ask about. Maven studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll arrange it. But Elena, you have 4 hours before that council session. Whatever you're planning, it needs to work fast. After Maven left, Kael caught Elena's hand. This is dangerous. If you fail... I'm already failing just by existing here. Elena squeezed his fingers. At least this way I fail doing something useful. His other hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. I meant what I said last night. Every word. I know. Elena let herself lean into the touch for just a moment. That's what scares me most. Thomas arrived within the hour, looking terrified to be in the royal chambers. He was young, maybe 20, with the lean build of someone who'd never had quite enough to eat and the wary eyes of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. You're not in trouble, Elena said immediately, watching him relax slightly. I need your help. My help. He looked between her and Kael like this might be a trap. The fire destroyed our winter stores. The nobles are going to spend weeks arguing about trade routes and political alliances while people starve. I need to know, really know, what resources we have that they're not seeing. Understanding dawned on Thomas's face. You want the underside. The what? The underside. The economy that runs parallel to the official one. He glanced at Kael nervously. The things servants in lower ranks do to survive that nobles pretend don't exist. Elena leaned forward. Tell me everything. Thomas did. He told her about the informal barter system among servants, about families who kept hidden gardens in the forest outside fortress walls, about fishing spots that weren't on any official map. He told her about widows who brewed ale in their cottages and sold it quietly, about hunters who traded game for repairs, about a whole network of survival that existed beneath the notice of pack hierarchy. The Millbrook settlement, Thomas said. They've got a grain surplus from good harvests, but they can't get it to market because the official trade route floods every spring and the merchants won't risk it. The mining road, Elena said, remembering the maps in Kael's study. The old route through the foothills. Right, but it needs repairs, fallen trees, washouts from last winter. Would take maybe 20 people a week to clear it. Elena looked at Kael. How fast can we mobilize a work crew? For official pack business? Days. The council would need to approve, not official business. Elena's plan crystallized. Lower ranks and servants who want to volunteer, people who actually need those grain stores to survive winter. Kael's expression shifted as he understood. You're building an alliance. I'm proving that I actually care about more than just staying alive. Elena turned to Thomas. Can you spread word? I need volunteers who can work, clearing roads, organizing supplies, coordinating with settlements. I'll be there working alongside them. You? Thomas looked skeptical. No offense, but you're supposed to be queen now. Queens don't do manual labor. This one does. Elena met his eyes. And Thomas, I remember last night. You didn't have to help me in that fire. You could have saved yourself first. But you came back for those servants. He ducked his head. Seemed like the right thing. That's exactly the kind of wolf I need. So will you help me? Thomas studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I'll help. After he left, Kael pulled Elena close. The council session, I know, they're going to tear me apart. She pressed her face against his chest, stealing a moment of safety before the storm. But at least I'll have something real to show them. Something more than just being the half-breed you're sleeping with. You're so much more than that. To you, maybe. To them, I'm still nothing. Elena pulled back, straightening her shoulders. So let's change their minds. The council chamber was packed when Elena and Kael entered. Every noble family had sent representatives, along with senior warriors and alpha witnesses from across the territory. The room stank of aggression barely contained, of wolves itching for conflict. Thorn stood at the center, his silver hair gleaming in the torchlight. Seraphine stood beside him, her expression carefully neutral except for the triumph in her eyes. Thank you for attending on such short notice, Thorn began, his voice carrying clearly. We gather today to address a matter of grave concern. The king's choice of mate threatens the stability of our pack. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Elena stood beside Kael's throne. There was no seat for her yet, another pointed reminder, and tried not to let them see her hands shaking. Elena Voss is half-breed, Thorn continued. No family, no training, no political alliances. Worse, her presence makes us vulnerable. Last night's attack proves that clearly. Last night's attack was arson, Kael cut in, his voice hard. Someone deliberately set that fire. Perhaps, but the target was clear. The half-breed who has no business being here. They struck at our supplies because they knew she'd be too weak to help defend them. She saved 6 lives, Maven spoke up from her position near the door. More than any noble did last night. She also put lives at risk by being here at all. Seraphine stepped forward. Her very existence draws attacks. She's a liability we cannot afford. Elena felt the weight of every eye in the room. This was it. The moment to either prove herself or be destroyed. She'd prepared words, practiced arguments. All of it fled from her mind, leaving only raw truth. You're right, she said quietly. The room fell silent. Kale tensed beside her, but Elena pressed on. I am half-breed. I have no family, no training, no political connections. Everything you've said about me is factually accurate. She met Thorne's eyes directly. But you're wrong about what that means. Enlighten us, Seraphine said coldly. Elena took a breath. Last night's fire destroyed a third of our winter grain stores. In 4 months, this territory will face serious food shortages. Every noble in this room knows it, and what are you doing about it? Thorne's expression hardened. The council will address supply concerns through proper channels. Proper channels take weeks, months, if you factor in all the negotiating and posturing. Meanwhile, the lower ranks and servants who actually keep this fortress running will starve first. Elena's voice grew stronger. I spent this morning talking to those wolves, the ones you don't see. And you know what I learned? There are solutions you've never even considered because you've never had to think like someone at the bottom. This is irrelevant. It's completely relevant. Elena cut across Thorne, surprising herself with her own boldness. You say I'm weak because I can't fight like a warrior. But being queen isn't about combat. It's about serving the entire pack, not just the powerful parts. She gestured to Maven, who stepped forward with a rolled map. Elena spread it across the council table. The Millbrook settlement has grain surplus, she said, pointing. But we can't access it because the main trade route floods. There's an alternative here, the old mining road. It needs clearing and basic repairs. I'm organizing a volunteer crew to open it within the week. Volunteer? Another noble scoffed. And who exactly is volunteering for hard labor? 43 wolves so far. Elena met his sneer with calm certainty. Lower ranks, servants, displaced families, people who understand that complaining about problems is less useful than fixing them, and I'll be working alongside them. You? Seraphine's laugh was cruel. You can barely lift a bucket of water without struggling. Then I'll struggle. Elena straightened. But I'll be there. And when that grain reaches the fortress, it'll feed everyone, noble and servant alike. That's what queens do. They serve. Kale rose from his throne, his presence commanding immediate attention. Elena has identified a critical supply issue and proposed a viable solution in under 4 hours. How long has this council known about the Millbrook surplus? Months? And what concrete action has been taken? The nobles shifted uncomfortably. No one answered. I chose Elena because she sees what you've trained yourselves to ignore, Kyle continued. The foundations this pack is built on. The wolves who actually make everything function. You call her weak, but she ran into fire last night while you stood safe. She's organizing solutions while you organize complaints. So tell me, who's really serving this pack? Thorne's face flushed with anger. This is about more than one supply route. Then make it about more. Elena's voice cut through the rising arguments. You want to challenge my worth? Fine. Give me 1 month. Let me prove that I can actually help this territory. If I fail, I'll step aside voluntarily. No fight, no drama. I'll leave. The room went very quiet. Kale turned to her, surprise and concern warring on his face. But if I succeed, Elena pressed on, you acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, strength comes in forms you haven't been measuring. That serving wolves at every level matters as much as political alliances. That being queen is about more than bloodline. And how exactly do we measure your success? Thorne asked. The Millbrook grain route opened and functioning, winter stores secured, and Elena hesitated, then committed fully. A proposal for pack reforms that address the treatment of lower ranks and half-breeds, concrete changes that you vote on. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. You're bargaining for policy changes? I'm bargaining for fairness and proving I can govern, not just exist. Elena looked around the room. 1 month, that's all I'm asking. The nobles conferred in hushed voices. Elena could feel Kael's tension beside her, could practically hear him wanting to intervene, but this had to be her choice, her risk. Finally, Thorne spoke. 1 month. But understand, we'll be watching. Any failure, any sign of weakness, and you're done. And if you voluntarily step aside, the king doesn't get to simply choose another inappropriate mate. He selects from approved candidates. It was a trap, Elena realized. Even if she succeeded, they'd set the bar impossibly high. But it was also time. Precious time to prove herself, to build support, to change minds. Agreed, she said. Kale's hand found hers, squeezed once, a reminder that she wasn't alone. The council dispersed with clear reluctance, nobles shooting dark looks and muttered threats. Seraphine was the last to leave, pausing at the door. 1 month, she said quietly, just for Elena. That's how long you have to live. Then she was gone, and Elena sagged against the table, her bravado crumbling. That was insane, Maven said, but she was almost smiling. Brilliant, but insane. I just bought us 30 days, Elena replied. Now I actually have to deliver. Then we'd better get to work, Kael said, because I'm not losing you to a technicality or an assassin. The next week blurred into exhausting, terrifying progress. Elena threw herself into the work with desperate energy, rising before dawn to join the road crews in the foothills. Thomas had been right. Word spread quickly through the lower ranks, and volunteers appeared daily. Not because they supported her exactly, but because clearing the mining road meant survival. Elena worked alongside them, her hands blistering and her muscles screaming. She couldn't match their strength or endurance, but she showed up. Every single day, covered in mud and sweat, struggling with logs that heavier wolves moved easily, refusing to quit. You don't have to do this, you know, a female servant said one afternoon, watching Elena wrestle with a fallen branch. You're queen now. You could just give orders. Queens who just give orders don't understand what they're ordering, Elena grunted, finally dragging the branch clear. Besides, how else will I know if I'm asking too much? The woman studied her, then grabbed the other end of the branch. Fair enough. Small moments like that built something Elena hadn't expected. Not loyalty exactly, but recognition. The servants in lower ranks who worked beside her began to nod when she passed, to save her a seat at the work meals, to offer quiet advice about easier ways to handle heavy loads. Meanwhile, Kael managed the political side, fielding noble complaints and watching for threats. Maven coordinated security, rotating guards to keep Elena protected without making it obvious. And every night, Elena collapsed into bed too exhausted to worry about assassination attempts. On the 8th day, they broke through. The road was clear, passable, ready for merchant carts. Elena stood at the crest of the foothills, looking down at their work, and felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Pride. Not bad for a half-breed, Thomas said, grinning. Elena laughed, surprised by the sound. Not bad for a team of wolves everyone underestimated. The grain shipment from Millbrook arrived 3 days later, enough to replace what the fire had destroyed, and then some. Elena organized the distribution personally, making sure the lower-rank families got their share first, before the nobles could claim the best portions. This is backwards, a storage master complained. Rank determines allocation. Need determines allocation, Elena corrected. The families who've been rationing all week get restocked first. Everyone else can wait an extra day. He looked ready to argue, then saw Maven standing behind Elena with her arms crossed. He wisely shut up. Word of the redistribution spread. Some nobles grumbled about disrupted hierarchy, but lower-rank families who'd been facing hungry children suddenly had full stores, and they noticed who'd made that happen. Elena was in the kitchen helping sort grain sacks because old habits died hard, when an older servant approached her. The woman had worked in the fortress for 40 years and had never spoken directly to Elena before. My granddaughter, she said quietly. She was one of the girls you pulled from the fire. Elena's hand stilled on the grain. Is she all right? Healing well, thanks to you. The woman's weathered face creased in something that might have been a smile. I just wanted you to know. Some of us see what you're doing. Some of us think maybe things can be different. She left before Elena could respond, but the words settled warm in her chest. Some of us. Not all. Not even most. But some. It was a start. The breakthrough came 2 weeks into Elena's trial period. Rogue attacks hit the southern border, not organized enough to be an invasion, but coordinated enough to be dangerous. A settlement called Riverside sent desperate word. 20 rogues, burning farms, taking hostages. They needed help immediately. The council convened an emergency session, arguing about troop deployment and tactical responses. Elena sat silent in her still unofficial seat beside Kael's throne, listening to nobles debate like they had all the time in the world. We need to wait for border reinforcements, Thorne argued. Send a full battalion with proper support. That takes 3 days minimum, another noble countered. Those people need help now. Then we send a smaller force, elite warriors who can move fast. And if it's a trap? If there are more rogues than reported? On and on, circling the same arguments while people died. Elena felt something snap inside her. "Stop," she said. The room fell silent, surprised that she'd spoken. "Every minute you spend arguing is another minute those families are in danger," Elena continued, standing. "You're so worried about looking weak or making tactical mistakes that you're forgetting actual wolves are suffering right now." "We're being strategic," Thorn began. "You're being cowards." The word came out harder than Elena intended, but she didn't take it back. "Send your elite warriors if you want, but I'm going to Riverside now, with anyone willing to actually help instead of just talk about helping." Kyle rose. "Elena, I'm going." She met his eyes. "You wanted me to prove I can lead? This is what leadership looks like. Not committees and careful politics. Action." "You'll get yourself killed," Seraphine said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll save lives while you're still debating." Elena turned to Maven. "I need volunteers. Fast movers, good fighters, anyone willing to actually do something." Maven's expression shifted into a fierce grin. "You've got me, and I'll bring my best squad." "I'm coming," Thomas said from the back of the chamber. Others joined, not many, but enough. 10 warriors total, plus Elena. Not the massive force Thorn wanted, but fast and motivated. "This is madness," Thorn sputtered. "The king cannot allow his chosen mate to "The king," Kyle cut in, his voice ringing with authority, "supports his queen's decision, and I'm going with her." The ride south was hard and fast, pushing horses to their limits. They reached Riverside by dusk to find the rogues had holed up in the settlement's meeting hall with hostages. The situation was worse than reported, not 20 rogues, but 30, and they'd already killed several people. "We need a plan," Maven said, studying the building from cover. "I have one." Elena's mind raced. "They're expecting a fight. Warriors breaking down doors, violence meeting violence. What if we give them something else?" "Like what?" "An exit." Elena turned to Kyle. "You said most rogues aren't evil, just desperate. Wolves who left packs or got exiled. They're fighting because they have nothing to lose." "You want to negotiate?" Maven looked skeptical. "I want to give them a choice that isn't death." Elena's plan crystallized. "Kyle, can you offer them sanctuary? Real sanctuary, not a trap. If they release the hostages, they can petition to join the pack, probationary membership, supervised, but a genuine chance." "The council will lose their minds," Kyle said. "The council isn't here." Elena met his eyes. "We are. And those hostages are dying while we debate. So what's it going to be? Politics or lives?" Kale studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You're right. Maven, white flag, I'm going in to talk." "Not alone," Elena said. "We go together." "Absolutely not. Together." She grabbed his hand. "Partners, remember?" They approached the meeting hall under truce banner, alone and exposed. The rogues could have killed them easily. Instead, their leader, a scarred female named Iris, met them at the door. "Come to threaten us?" Iris asked, her knife still pressed against a hostage's throat. "Come to offer you a choice," Kyle said. "Release the hostages. Join my pack under supervised probation, or die here. Those are your options." Iris laughed bitterly. "Join your pack? We're rogues, exiles. Nobody wants us." "I do," Elena said quietly. "I was nobody too. Half-breed servant everyone wanted gone. But someone gave me a chance. Now I'm giving you one. Real sanctuary. Real belonging, if you'll take it." "Why should we trust you?" "Because I'm standing here unarmed, offering you hope, instead of hiding behind an army, offering you death." Elena stepped closer, ignoring Kyle's sharp breath. "You're scared, desperate. I understand that. But killing hostages won't fix it. It'll just make you murderers. Is that who you want to be?" Iris's knife wavered. "What's the catch? Probation means proving yourselves, working, following pack law, earning trust. It won't be easy, but it's a chance." Elena held her gaze. "Take it." The silence stretched impossibly long. Then Iris lowered her knife. "Everyone stand down," she called to the other rogues. "We're accepting sanctuary." The hostages were released, shaken but alive. The rogues laid down their weapons, and Elena stood in the middle of it all, barely believing it had worked. Maven approached as they were securing the former rogues. "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the dumbest." "Can't it be both?" Elena managed a shaky laugh. "With you? Always." But Maven was smiling. "You just saved 30 lives and brought 30 more wolves into the pack. The council's going to hate it." "Good," Elena said. "They need something to hate besides me." The ride back to Ironclaw was slower, the rescued hostages traveling with them. Word of what happened spread ahead. Servants and lower ranks lining the road to watch Elena pass, their expressions shifting from suspicion to something approaching respect. When they entered the fortress, people were waiting. Not just nobles and warriors, but the servants Elena had saved from the fire, the families who'd gotten grain first, the workers who'd cleared the road, lower ranks who'd never mattered to anyone before. They didn't cheer, that would have been too much, but they watched. And in their eyes, Elena saw recognition. She'd proven something, not to everyone, not even to most, but to enough. The council convened immediately, of course. Thorn was furious about the unauthorized sanctuary offer. Seraphine argued it set dangerous precedent. Other nobles joined the complaints, but Kael stood firm. "My queen made a command decision in the field. She saved lives and strengthened our territory. If you want to challenge that, challenge me directly." No one did. That night, Elena stood at the window of their chambers, watching the fortress settle into darkness. Kael came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. 3 weeks done, he murmured against her hair. 1 to go. "And then what?" Elena leaned back against him. "They vote on whether I've earned the right to stay. They vote on whether they can afford to lose you." His arms tightened. "You're changing things, Elena. Really changing them. The lower ranks see it. Even some warriors are starting to see it. You're proving that leadership isn't about dominance. Tell that to Seraphine." "Seraphine's running out of allies. Her attempt to frame you as weak backfired. Now you're the half-breed who saves lives while nobles debate." He turned her to face him. "You're winning." Elena wanted to believe him. Part of her, growing larger every day, actually did believe him. But she'd lived too long at the bottom to trust victory easily. "1 more week," she whispered. "Anything could still go wrong." Kael kissed her forehead. "Then we face it together." Outside their window, the fortress slept. But somewhere in the darkness, Elena knew enemies still plotted. Seraphine wouldn't give up this easily. The nobles wouldn't accept change without a fight. But for the first time since that morning in the training yard, Elena felt something other than fear. She felt possible. The attack came on the 28th day. Elena was in the lower district meeting with families who'd been displaced by rogue attacks when Maven appeared running, her face stark with urgency. "The fortress," she gasped. "Seraphine's making her move. Now." They raced back through narrow streets, Elena's heart pounding against her ribs. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building like pressure before a storm. But the timing was deliberate. 2 days before her trial period ended, when success seemed within reach, the fortress gates stood open, which was wrong. Guards lay unconscious but alive, which was worse. Seraphine wasn't hiding this. She wanted witnesses. "Where's Kael?" Elena demanded. "Council chamber. She called an emergency session, claimed new evidence of your unworthiness." Maven's hand went to her weapon. "It's a trap, Elena. She's cornered him politically while her people—" An explosion rocked the eastern wing. Not fire this time. Something worse. The sound of stone cracking, of supports giving way. "The refugee quarters," Elena breathed. The rogues from Riverside, the families she'd given sanctuary to, were housed in that wing. "She's going to kill them and blame me for bringing them here." "We need to get you to safety." "No." Elena was already running toward the destruction. "We need to get them out." The eastern wing was chaos. Dust filled the air, beams hung at dangerous angles, and screams echoed from within the rubble. Elena didn't hesitate. She plunged into the wreckage, calling for survivors. "Here," a voice, weak and terrified. "We're trapped." Elena found Iris pinned under a fallen beam, 3 other rogues with her. The female who'd led the attack on Riverside now looked up at Elena with desperate eyes. "I told you Sanctuary was a trap," Iris said bitterly. "This isn't Sanctuary failing. This is someone trying to destroy it." Elena grabbed the beam, straining. "Help me!" Others appeared. Thomas, servants Elena had worked alongside, even some warriors who'd been stationed nearby. Together they lifted, pulled, freed the trapped wolves one by one. The building groaned ominously. "Everyone out!" Maven ordered. "The whole structure's compromised." They evacuated in controlled chaos, Elena counting heads, making sure no one was left behind. When the last refugee stumbled free, the eastern wing collapsed entirely, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. Seraphine stood watching from across the courtyard, her expression perfectly composed. She'd positioned herself where nobles could see her, calm, controlled, the picture of leadership while Elena stood covered in dust and blood. "Such a tragedy," Seraphine called out, her voice carrying. "If only someone had warned us that bringing in dangerous rogues would compromise our security." "You did this," Elena said flatly. "Did I?" Seraphine's smile was razor sharp. "I wasn't anywhere near that wing. I was in the council chamber with the king and half the noble families. We all heard the explosion together." She gestured to the destruction. "But you were here. Convenient, isn't it? Almost like you knew it was coming." The implication hung in the air, poisonous. Elena saw nobles exchanging glances, saw suspicion blooming on faces that had just started to soften toward her. "She's trying to frame me," Elena said. "Or you're trying to deflect blame." Seraphine moved closer, playing to the growing crowd. "Face it, half-breed. You brought rogues into our home. You pushed reforms that weakened our security. And now people are dying because you were too weak to see the danger." "No one died," Maven cut in. "Elena got them all out. This time. What about next time? What about when her poor judgment costs real lives?" Seraphine's voice rose with manufactured passion. "How many attacks have we suffered since she arrived? The fire, the rogue incidents, now this. She's either incompetent or complicit. Either way, she's a threat we can't afford." The crowd murmured agreement. Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, all her progress crumbling. Seraphine had played this perfectly, timed the attack, positioned herself with alibis, orchestrated public opinion. "You don't have proof," Elena said. "I don't need proof. I have pattern." Seraphine turned to address the crowd directly. "Our king chose his heart over his duty. We all understand that impulse. But look at the cost. Our fortress damaged, our security compromised, our traditions shattered. All for what? A half-breed with delusions of adequacy?" "Enough!" Kale's voice cut through the noise like a blade. He emerged from the council chamber with Thorn and other nobles, his expression carved from ice. "You've made your accusations, Seraphine. Now back them with evidence or stand down." "The evidence is burning rubble, Your Majesty." Seraphine gestured grandly. "How much more do you need?" "I need proof you didn't cause this yourself." The courtyard went silent. Seraphine's composure cracked slightly. "Careful," she said softly. "Accusing a noble of treason without cause is dangerous." "So is terrorism." Kyle moved to stand beside Elena, his presence solid and certain. "You've been undermining my authority since the gathering, spreading rumors, orchestrating incidents, trying to force my hand. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" "You have no proof. I have this." Maven stepped forward holding a soot-stained piece of fabric. "Found it near the explosion site. Blackthorn family colors scorched from handling accelerant. Careless, really. You should train your people better." Seraphine's face went white, then red with rage. "That proves nothing. It proves enough for an investigation." Kale's voice went cold with royal authority. "Maven, take her into custody. I want every member of her household questioned." "You can't do this," Seraphine snarled, her composure shattering completely. "I'm from one of the oldest families, and you just committed treason against your king." Kyle stepped closer, and Elena saw the alpha rising in him. Powerful, dangerous, absolute. "You tried to frame my queen. You endangered innocent wolves. You destroyed pack property. Give me one reason I shouldn't exile you right now." "Because half the nobles support me." Seraphine's desperation showed now, raw and ugly. You exile me, you start a civil war, the pack will fracture, everything will fall apart. Then let it fall apart, Kael's voice rang across the courtyard, because I'm done building on foundations of cruelty and injustice. Elena showed me that. She showed all of us that strength isn't about dominance. It's about serving wolves at every level, not just the powerful ones. He turned to address the crowd, and Elena saw the king he was meant to be. Not the cold warrior his father had shaped, but something better. Look at what she's accomplished, Kael continued. In 4 weeks, Elena has opened new trade routes, secured our winter supplies, saved lives in combat, and gave sanctuary to wolves everyone else had abandoned. And she did it while being threatened, attacked, and undermined at every turn. His hand found Elena's. That's the strength we need. That's the leadership this pack deserves. She's still half-breed trash, someone called from the crowd, but the voice sounded uncertain now. Then I guess I'm choosing trash over treachery. Kael's voice went hard. Anyone who can't accept that, there's the gate. Leave now with my blessing, but if you stay, you follow my laws. And those laws say Elena Voss is your queen. The silence that followed felt enormous. Elena watched nobles exchange glances, warriors shift uncertainly, servants hold their breath. This was the moment, the point where everything either broke or transformed. Thorn stepped forward first. The old noble looked at Elena for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I've spent 60 years in this pack, he said slowly, watched 3 kings rule, fought in more battles than I care to count, and I've never seen anyone challenge our hierarchy the way you have, girl. Elena's stomach dropped. This was it, the final rejection. But I've also never seen anyone care more about the wolves we forget, Thorn continued, or fight harder to prove themselves worthy, or risk more for people who can't give anything back. He turned to Kael. She's earned it, Your Majesty, not through bloodline or politics, through actual service. That's worth more than any alliance. He knelt, and the gesture sent shockwaves through the crowd. Other nobles followed, slowly, reluctantly, but they followed. Warriors knelt. Servants bowed their heads, not everyone. Some nobles stood rigid with disapproval. Some warriors looked disgusted, but enough bent the knee that the message was clear. Elena had won. Maven hauled Seraphine away, the former noblewoman spitting curses and threats. But her power was broken, her influence shattered. She'd gambled everything on one final move and lost. Elena stood in the center of the courtyard, covered in dust and exhausted beyond measure, and tried to process what had just happened. 4 weeks ago, she'd been invisible. Now hundreds of wolves knelt before her. Breathe, Kael murmured in her ear. You're allowed to be overwhelmed. I think I'm going to be sick. Later. Right now you're a queen. Act like it. So Elena straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and addressed her pack for the first time. Thank you, she said, her voice carrying more confidence than she felt. I know this isn't what most of you wanted. I know I'm not what you expected. But I promise you, I will serve every wolf in this territory. Not just the strong, not just the connected, everyone. She paused. That's what it means to be pack. We survive together or we fail together, and I'm choosing survival. The words felt inadequate, but they were true. And truth, Elena had learned, mattered more than eloquence. The coronation happened 3 days later in the Great Hall, now repaired and decorated. It was nothing like the grand gathering, smaller, more intimate, witnessed by wolves who'd actually chosen to attend rather than those obligated by politics. Elena wore a gown Maven had commissioned, simple but elegant, in colors that honored both her mother's Omega heritage and her new position. Her hands shook as servants arranged the fabric, as someone wove flowers into her hair, as the reality of what was happening finally sank in. I can't do this, she whispered to Maven. I don't know how to be queen. Good, Maven replied, adjusting a clasp. The ones who think they know are usually terrible at it. You'll figure it out as you go. What if I fail? Then you fail. But at least you'll fail trying to do the right thing, which is more than most queens manage. Maven stepped back, assessing. You look terrified. I am terrified. Perfect, use that. It'll keep you humble. The ceremony was brief. Thorn spoke words about tradition and change, about honoring the past while building the future. Kael placed the crown on Elena's head, A simple silver circlet, no jewels or excess. It felt impossibly heavy. "This is usually when you say something inspiring," Kael murmured, as applause rippled through the hall. Elena looked out at the faces watching her. Nobles who'd reluctantly accepted her, warriors who'd fought beside her, servants who'd worked with her, lower ranks who'd finally been seen, and standing together in the back, Iris and the rogues from Riverside, now pack members with full rights and responsibilities. "I was nobody," Elena said, her voice steady. "A half-breed servant everyone ignored or despised. I survived by being invisible, by never challenging, by accepting that I didn't matter." She paused. "But someone saw me anyway. Someone believed I could be more than what circumstances made me. And that changed everything." She looked at Kael, then back at the crowd. "So that's what we're building here. A pack where everyone matters, where strength means lifting others up, not pushing them down, where being different isn't the same as being wrong." Elena's hands tightened on the crown. "I know some of you hate this, hate me. That's okay. You don't have to like your queen, but you do have to work with her, and I promise, I will work for you, all of you, every single day." The applause that followed wasn't universal, but it was real, and it was enough. The celebration afterward was chaotic and joyful, and nothing like the formal gathering. Lower ranks mingled with nobles, servants danced with warriors, and for one night the hierarchy blurred into something almost resembling equality. Elena slipped away from the noise, needing a moment to breathe. She found herself in Kael's study, their study now, technically, standing before the maps where this had all begun. "Found you," Kael said from the doorway. "Just needed quiet." Elena traced the mining road route on the map. "Remember when I first told you about this? I was terrified you'd have me thrown out for snooping. Remember when I first saw you in the training yard?" Kael moved behind her, his arms circling her waist. "I knew immediately you were different, dangerous to everything I'd built my life around." "Was I worth it?" "Every single second." He turned her to face him. "You changed me, Elena. Changed the whole pack. In 4 weeks, you accomplished more than I did in 8 years." "That's not true." "It is. I was maintaining a broken system. You're building a new one." His hand cupped her face. "I love you. I should have said it sooner, but I'm saying it now. I love you for your strength and your stubbornness, and your absolute refusal to give up even when everything's against you." Elena felt tears sting her eyes. "I love you too, even though you're completely insane and chose me over political stability and basically everything you were supposed to do. Best decision I ever made." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Elena let herself fall into it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new enemies, new impossibilities to overcome. But tonight, she was queen. She was loved. She had survived and transformed and proven every person who'd underestimated her completely wrong. Years passed. The changes Elena implemented didn't happen overnight. Real transformation never did. But slowly, steadily, the pack evolved. Lower ranks gained representation in council decisions. Half-breeds earned rights previously denied them. New trade routes brought prosperity to settlements that had struggled for generations. The rogues Elena had given sanctuary to became some of the pack's most loyal members, proving that second chances mattered. Not everyone approved. Some noble families left, unwilling to accept the new order. A few attempted challenges that Kael put down with decisive authority, but gradually resistance faded into reluctant acceptance, then into something approaching support. Elena never stopped working alongside the wolves she served. She cleared roads, distributed supplies, sat with families facing hardship. Being queen didn't mean being separate. It meant being responsible. And Elena took that responsibility seriously. She also never forgot where she came from. Every servant who entered the fortress found themselves noticed, valued, given opportunities to grow. The invisible ones finally had someone who saw them. On a cold morning 5 years after her coronation, Elena stood in the training yard where Kael had first looked at her. She was 8 months pregnant, her body awkward and uncomfortable, watching younger wolves drill under Maven's sharp commands. "You're supposed to be resting," Kael said, appearing beside her with a cloak. "I've been resting for months. I'm bored." Elena pulled the cloak tight. "Besides, I wanted to see Thomas. He's testing for elite guard today. The same Thomas who was a lower rank nobody 5 years ago? The very same. Elena smiled, watching the young wolf execute a perfect combat sequence. Turns out when you actually train people instead of writing them off, they surprise you. Thomas finished his test with Maven nodding approval. He caught Elena's eye and grinned, confident in a way that would have been impossible years ago. You built this, Kael said softly. This whole new world. You took a broken system and transformed it into something better. We built it, Elena corrected. You, me, Maven, Thomas, everyone who chose change over tradition. She pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling their child move. A new generation that would grow up in a pack where worth wasn't determined by bloodline alone, where half-breeds weren't automatically worthless, where strength meant compassion as much as combat. What are you thinking? Kael asked. I'm thinking about that morning in the training yard, when you looked at me and I thought my life was over. Elena leaned against him. Turns out it was just beginning. Regret anything? Not even a little. She turned to face him. Though I do regret that you're still better at political maneuvering than me. Even pregnant, I should be able to outthink you. You absolutely can. You just choose not to be devious about it. Someone has to maintain moral standards around here. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, warming the fortress walls. Around them, pack life continued, servants working alongside nobles, warriors training with lower ranks, a whole community that had learned to function as actual pack instead of just hierarchy. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, still wolves who resented the changes, still moments when Elena felt completely overwhelmed by the responsibility. But it was better, genuinely, measurably better. And it was real. That night, Elena went into labor 3 weeks early. The healers panicked, nobles fretted, and Kael looked more terrified than he'd ever been in combat. You're not allowed to die, he said, gripping her hand. That's an order. Not planning on it, Elena gasped between contractions. But maybe stop squeezing so hard? The labor was long and brutal and terrifying. But when their daughter finally arrived, screaming and perfect and absolutely furious at being born, Elena held her and felt everything make sense. She's beautiful, Kael whispered, his voice cracking. She's half-breed, Elena said, just like her mother. Think the pack can handle that? They'll have to. Besides, he touched their daughter's tiny hand. Look who her parents are. She's got the stubbornness of a survivor and the bloodline of a king. That's a dangerous combination. Elena laughed, exhausted and euphoric. We're going to be terrible at this. Probably, but we'll figure it out together. They named her Lyra, after Kael's mother. And when they presented her to the pack 3 days later, Elena watched nobles and servants alike come forward to witness the newest member of their family. Some looked approving, some looked uncertain, but no one looked disgusted. No one called Lyra trash or questioned her worth. Progress. Real, measurable progress. A decade passed. Lyra grew into a fierce, intelligent child who had her mother's stubbornness and her father's authority. She played with servant children and noble heirs alike, seeing no difference because she'd been taught there was none. Elena stood on the fortress walls, watching the territories spread below, thinking about how far they'd come. The pack had expanded, incorporating settlements that had previously existed at the margins. Trade flourished. Attacks from rogues had decreased dramatically as more chose sanctuary over violence. It wasn't paradise. There were still problems, still conflicts, still wolves who hated everything Elena represented. But the foundation was solid now, built on fairness instead of fear, on service instead of dominance. Queen Elena, a young servant barely 14, approached nervously. The council is ready for you. Elena smiled at the girl's hesitation. You can just call me Elena, you know, or ma'am if you're feeling formal, but the whole queen thing makes me feel ancient. But you are the queen, technically, but I'm also someone who spent years hauling water and scrubbing floors. Never forget that. Elena touched the girl's shoulder gently. What's your name? Mira. Well, Mira, thank you for the message, and if you're interested, we're always looking for assistance in the administrative wing. Good way to learn governance if you're thinking about advancing. The girl's eyes went wide. Me? But I'm just... Nobody's just anything, Elena cut her off gently. Remember that. Now go on. I'm sure you have duties. Mira left looking dazed and hopeful. Elena watched her go and saw herself a decade earlier. Invisible, underestimated, desperate to believe that maybe things could be different. The council meeting was routine, budget discussions, territory disputes, the usual administrative work that kept a pack functioning. Elena had learned to navigate these sessions with competence, if not enthusiasm. Some nobles still challenged her decisions, but with less venom now. She'd proven herself too thoroughly to dismiss. Afterward, she found Kael on their private balcony, Lyra asleep against his shoulder. "Long meeting?" he asked. "Productive." Elena kissed their daughter's forehead. "Thorn actually supported my proposal for expanded medical care in the outer settlements, without even arguing about cost. That's growth. That's exhaustion. He's too old to fight every battle." Elena sank into the chair beside him, though he did mutter something about half-breeds getting too much influence. "He always does. Then he votes with you anyway." "True." Elena looked out over the fortress. "Do you ever miss the old way, when things were simpler?" "Simpler for who?" Kael's voice was gentle. "For nobles who never had to think about the wolves they stepped on? Sure, it was simpler, but it was also brutal and unjust. I don't miss that. Even when it means constant challenges, constant resistance? Especially then, because the resistance means we're doing something that matters." He shifted Lyra carefully. "Besides, I've got you. That's worth any amount of political headaches." Elena leaned against him, feeling their daughter's steady breathing, her mate's solid warmth. She thought about the terrified servant girl who'd stood in the training yard certain her life was ending. She thought about the impossible choice Kael had made, the risks they'd taken, the system they'd challenged. And she thought about the fortress below them, where servants slept in better quarters than she'd ever had, where half-breeds held positions of actual authority, where rogues found sanctuary instead of slaughter, where wolves at every level knew they mattered. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was better. And better was enough. "I love you," Elena said quietly. "I know." Kael's arm tightened around her. "I love you too, my queen, my partner, my completely insane choice that turned out to be the best decision I ever made." "Completely insane is right," Elena smiled against his shoulder. "Who chooses a half-breed servant over political stability?" "Someone who wanted something real." He kissed her temple. "Someone who wanted you." Lyra stirred, mumbling something about training and hungry, then settled back into sleep. Elena watched her daughter, this perfect blend of two impossible things, and felt the weight of responsibility settle alongside love. This was what they'd fought for, this moment, this peace, this possibility that their child would grow up in a world less cruel than the one Elena had survived, that Lyra would never know what it meant to be invisible, to be worthless, to be erased. "Thank you," Elena whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. When I was nobody. When I was invisible. You saw me anyway." Kael's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing. "You were never invisible, Elena. You were just surrounded by wolves too blind to notice brilliance when it was scrubbing their floors." They sat together as stars emerged over the fortress, 3 lives intertwined, 2 impossible people who'd chosen love over duty and transformed everything because of it. The fortress slept below them, full of wolves from every rank, every background, every story. And in the morning, Elena Voss, half-breed, survivor, queen, would wake up and keep building the world she'd dreamed of when dreams seemed impossible. Because that's what queens did. Real queens. The kind who remembered where they came from and never stopped fighting for the wolves everyone else forgot. The kind who proved that strength wasn't about bloodline or dominance. It was about refusing to give up, even when the whole world said you should, especially then.